tumors. Learn more at uchealth.com. Southbound 75 continues slow through Lachlan. Better news on northbound 75. They cleared the accident at Buttermilk. Right lanes are open again. Traffic remains a bit heavy from Burlington Pike, but clearing out quickly now. Northbound 471, that's just about back up to speed after an earlier accident on the bridge. Coming up next, a guest who's trying to recover from his big Memorial Day weekend celebration. He'll need a new pack of hot dogs. He'll need a new pack of buns, and still trying to figure out why there's 10 dogs and 8 buns in a pack. Oh, and he'll need more sparklers by the 4th of July, too. The Judge is next. Chuck Ingram on 55 KRC, the talk station.
It's 8:29 here, 55 KRC, the talk station. Well, he's back anyway. Judge Napolitano. And last time we talked to you, Judge, Ingram was, I guess he forgot his goofy comments to you. So I don't know if he made up for the loss of comments last time. Judge Napolitano, welcome back to the 55 KRC Morning Show. It's always a pleasure having you on the program.
Oh, thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it's a pleasure to hear Ingram, no matter what he says.
Yes, he is an unknown variable. There's no question about it. God bless you in your column, Government by Experts. I loved it. How in the hell did we get to where we are today, given the limited nature of government that our founding fathers thought they created? Obviously, we are living in some sort of bastardized version of what they intended. We are just governed by unelected bureaucrats. It's just a bureaucratic nightmare. But thankfully, we've got a couple of recent Supreme Court decisions. And you bring up the last week, the unanimous Supreme Court with regard to the regulation of mud puddles. We'll let you elaborate on that. But also the West Virginia versus EPA case, which I thought was very, very important in honing back the reach of these regulatory agencies, sticking to the specific law that was passed and not allowing them to extend way beyond what was ever intended by the legislative branch. Like, for example, regulating mud puddles as part of navigable waters.
So the late Justice Scalia warned about this many times. The Wright case did not come to the court during his tenure on the court, but it has since then, as you point out so nicely, Brian. Basically, the concept of an administrative agency, the brainchild of President Woodrow Wilson, was that experts in particular fields would know how to govern us better than the people we elected and who are accountable to us every 2 or 4 or 6 years at the ballot box. So these experts, Wilson theorized, would run things like the Food and Drug Administration, which was started under his administration. He didn't foresee the EPA, but he certainly laid the groundwork for it. And the way the courts, not this court, but previous Supreme Courts, have interpreted all this was to allow the experts to expand their own authority as the need arose, not to go back to Congress for more authority, but to expand their authority. So Justice Scalia's argument is Congress has authority delegated to it by the Constitution. They can't delegate away what the Constitution delegated to them, because everything they have is subject to us sending them to Congress. When they give away some of their power to people who are always in office, the bureaucrats at the administrative agencies, they're not only giving away power that the Constitution gave them, they're giving away our ability to put a check on that power. So when the climate fanatics in the EPA decided that mud puddles, it's a big mud puddle, but it's a mud puddle, should be regulated, they got experts to testify that all waters are connected, even a mud puddle, which drips down to the water table, leads to a stream, which leads to a river, which leads to the ocean, which is regulated by the federal government. The Supreme Court said just last week, this is ridiculous. This is not what Congress authorized. Congress authorized you to regulate moving bodies of water on the surface of the earth that move into waters owned by the federal government. So this couple trying to build a house on 12 acres has been to the Supreme Court twice. The first time the court sent it back to the trial judge who ruled against them. This time the court ruled on their own and said, EPA, you can't do this.
Well,
But Brian, thousands of people in America own real estate, which is economically non-viable. They can't do anything with it and they can't sell it. It has no value because of this rule, which existed until last week. Now these people have some freedom.
what of the takings clause? I mean, this is effectively denying people the use of their land. And doesn't the government have to compensate people when even a regulatory agency renders completely ineffective the use of that land? I mean, prior to
Well,
the
there are
decision,
I agree with you. The Supreme Court does not agree with us. A regulatory taking is one that, according to the court, targets a specific piece of property as opposed to one that applies to all property. So for the non-lawyers here, the Fifth Amendment says the government can take property for its own use, for a public use, if it pays for it. What happens if the government takes property by imposing a regulation on it that's so burdensome that the owner can't use it? The government doesn't want to buy it. The government doesn't want to use it. It just wants it to sit there. The courts have gone both ways, but the last time the Supreme Court looked at that said, that's not a taking. Then you're really out of luck. If it's a taking, the government has to pay you for the property. If it's not a taking, their regulation survives that don't have to pay you. You're paying real estate on land that you can't use. You can't build a house on it. You can't rent it. You can't sell it. Now, a lot of that will stop as a result of this ruling. There was, by the way, another ruling on the same day involving a 94-year-old widow who had a very small condominium in a small town in Minnesota. She owed $15,000 in back taxes. The town seized the condominium and sold it for $40,000, paid itself the 15, and instead of giving her the 25, stole it and kept it for itself.
I saw that.
Pursuant to a Minnesota statute that permits that. Again, a unanimous Supreme Court says, what, are you crazy?
Right.
Give her the money back, give it to her with interest. This statute is gone.
And, you know, it's a wonderful thing to see unanimous decisions because, of course, the left screams bloody murder about the makeup of the court and they want to pack the court. But here you have, you know, justices who are liberal and justices who are conservative agreeing together that this is overreach, clearly, unequivocally. And so that's where we are. And I love the outcome on it. But you mentioned before, the nexus to this was the ditch that flowed into the creek, that flowed into navigable waters that the federal government owns. In the absence of that last component, the federal government ownership, if this was just a lake within a state and it was not governed by the federal, it wasn't owned by the federal government, would this have been impacted by the EPA? I guess I'm just wondering how they reach into our world. I know we have the Commerce Clause, we have the ability to tax, and then when we take money back from the federal government, it comes with strings attached. That's another nefarious way the federal government works its will when they lack the constitutional authority. So, I mean, is there any way to say no to this or assert the argument that this is beyond the powers of the federal government?
Well, you know, you have justices as liberal as Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan agreeing with Neil Gorsuch and Clarence Thomas, great defenders of property rights, that this is overreach. If I could modify your question slightly, I
Please.
would change it to, suppose Congress expressly authorized this and allowed the EPA to do it. Would they be able to get away with it? I mean, Justice Alito's opinion is based upon the wording of the Clean Water Statute,
Right.
which in the court's opinion did not authorize this, but suppose it did. I would argue that even if it did, it's unconstitutional. Who is the government to regulate a mud puddle in your backyard?
Agreed. Now, you spoke briefly of this right to just basically say no. I mean, you brought up Abraham Lincoln denying the lawful right of succession. Now, that does not mean you're supporting slavery. It's just the concept of being able to break away when the federal government no longer represents your interests. How does a state bring that about? I mean, I keep saying, one of the ways you can say no is just don't take the federal money back, and then they won't be able to control you via the receipt of those funds. But until we get rid of the Commerce Clause, that nefarious Wickard versus Filburn, we're at the behest of pretty much whatever they say. So
we are. One of the things you're talking about is the spending power. So when the Congress gives money to the states, it bribes them. Here's $100 million in New Jersey or Ohio to repave all the federal highways in your state. But in return for this, you have to lower the speed limit to 55 miles an hour. Now, this is a real case. It's called South Dakota versus Dole. And South Dakota said, well, what do you mean lower the speed limit? We don't even have speed limits on our federal highways. Thank you, Congress. We'll take the money. We're not lowering the speed limit. Went all the way to the Supreme Court in an opinion written by the conservative Republican Chief Justice Rehnquist said, you want the money, you take the strings. Now, what big government left-wing pinko president signed this into law? Ronald Reagan. I mean, this stuff happens all across the board with federal control of local behavior. I mean, the reason the maximum blood alcohol content in your veins is 0.08 before you can be prosecuted for DWI, it used to be 0.10, is because Congress bribed the states to lower it. Same thing, we'll give you money to pave the highways, lower the blood alcohol content, which is the trigger to DWI prosecutions. This is areas where Congress recognizes the Constitution didn't give it any authority, but it's going to buy that authority, purchase that authority by bribing the states to do it. You go to the Ohio Capitol and offer them $100 million to change the laws, and you'll be arrested for attempted bribery. But Congress has exempted itself from the bribery laws.
Well, and we're the victim of that too. We were forced here in Ohio to change the drinking age to 21, in spite of the fact we didn't want to do it, and we held out for a while. But boy, we needed those pesky federal dollars for the highway fund, so we ultimately capitulated and we bent to the federal government's will. I would love to have time to be able to talk about the debt ceiling, and of course, Ukrainian drones bombing Moscow. Sounds like World War III is getting ready to break out, Your Honor. But we are out of time, and I've got another guest following this segment, so we'll save those conversations for another date. I'm sure the topics will still be there during our next conversation, Your Honor.
You got it, Brian.
Tonight, Defending Freedom. Look for him on Facebook and, of course, judgenap.com. The name of the column, Government by Experts. It'll be out at midnight. Please read it. It is well worth the few minutes it'll take to read. An excellent, excellent column, Your Honor. Love talking to you. I look forward to next Friday or next Wednesday. And between now and then, as always, best of health, my friend.
All the best, Brian. Thank you.
Take care. It's 8:41. Sharon Coolidge from the Cincinnati Enquirer coming up next. Talk about, the budget. City of Cincinnati's